Welcome everyone to today's research update. We're joined today by Marion Beecher, and Marion's just going to go through a number of things around HR and some work ongoing in the labour element down in Moore Park. So Marion, I'll hand it over to you. For anyone that has questions or that, you can drop them in the text box and we'll take them as she comes, and then at the end we'll have hopefully a few questions and we'll answer them as well. So Marion, over to you.
Brilliant, thanks Pat. So I'll just start sharing my presentation. Brilliant. So the title of my presentation today is how can dairy farmers become good employers? So I'm going to go through is just a bit of a background introduction and kind of setting the scene and setting the context for this research and this body of research that's ongoing. And then bring in some research results that we've seen over the last few years, and then just a summary slide at the end. So this is a slide looking at the farm workforce issues in a global context, and it was presented by Ruth Nettle in 2018, and it just sets up the scene and it explains very well where we're positioned in terms of workforce and people available to work on farms. So in recent years, the total number of people working in agriculture is declining, and we've seen that there's a 50% decrease in the last 20 years in industrialized countries. So we're looking, I suppose, in the context in Ireland where we've got a probably greater demand than ever for people to work in dairy farms, within the context of that there's probably less people than ever available. So agriculture is already competing in a very competitive market. And you know, there's business analysts who predict that actually in the next 20 years there's going to be a skills scarce world. And we've seen that, you know, farm expansions increases, you know, as I said, the demand for a non-family workforce. But I suppose there's an important point here in terms that we need to distinguish between a skills shortage from a labour shortage. So skill shortage means that there's enough people to work on farms, or there's enough people to work in jobs, but they just don't have the skills to do those jobs. Whereas a labour shortage means that there's not enough people to do the work. So it predicted, you know, we know that skilled trade worker jobs are the hardest to fill, and you know that's common in agriculture and dairy farms. We also see it a bit in the construction industry and elsewhere. So overall, there is a global skill shortage. Not every country has a labour shortage, but there is a general global skill shortage. So there is global competition for mid-range and higher skill level jobs. So in Ireland, you know, we're working on expanding industry for the last number of years. So we've seen a 30% increase in workforce demand, and it's estimated that an extra 6,000 additional people are required in the industry by 2025. So farm expansion increases the overall labour demand, and seasonality, I suppose, impacts on peak demand. So in the spring calving system, we know that, you know, there's about 57% of the work occurs in that, you know, spring summer period. So that's when, you know, there's extra demand in the system for workers. And I suppose to combat this, we need to maximise, you know, efficiency, and we need to use, you know, good time use and good strategies, you know, using contractors, seasonal staffing strategies, and efficient milking systems. So I suppose this all comes down to ensuring you're efficient before you go and hire in people. So making best use of work practices, facilities, technology. And I suppose in Ireland, we are seeing both a skills and labour shortage. So this is, again, as I said, farms have been increasing in the last number of years. So we're changing from, you know, traditional family farms to small business structures. And we've seen then with an increase in both part-time and full-time hired employees and a requirement on farms. And then we're seeing that more off-farm employment means there's less family help available on farms as well. So that's kind of a combined effect that we're seeing less family members working on farms, and then an increased demand for part-time and full-time employees. And then up here in the top right-hand corner, we have a graphic where it was a survey done in 2019 of 300 dairy farmers, looking at their future intentions. And we can see that, you know, at that time, 50% of them were intending to grow, and 44% were intending to stay the same size. So demand for workers and people is still going to continue. It's still going to be an issue on farms. So I suppose we need to position ourselves, or farmers need to position themselves to be, in order to be the most attractive workplace or attractive employer to attract and retain the best people on farms. So this would have been a time-use study completed by Justine Deming in 2015-2016, looking at different herd sizes on the bottom axis, and then looking at the time required to run those farms and who's doing the work to run those farms. So we can just see those are the total hours required to operate the farm in the overall year. So a farm with, a highly efficient operated farm with between 80 and 149 cows requires about 3,000 hours in the year to increase in the year, and this increases as you're increasing in herd size. And what we're seeing is that the proportion of work that's contributed by the farmer, roughly it's staying very similar in terms of the total hours worked. But we're seeing that as herd sizes increases, the proportion percentage provided by the farmer is decreasing. So there's an increasing need for an increasing need for full-time and part-time workers and full-time members on these larger scale farms. But I think what important point is that regardless of herd sizes, even farms with 80 cows or less, there's still a requirement for some part-time workers, and I suppose that's particularly in the springtime. So then in terms of the farm workforce, I suppose who's working on the farm. So we see that in other countries are highly dependent on migrant workers. So New Zealand and Australia, the US are particular examples. I suppose in Ireland, we're not as dependent or not as reliant on migrant workers, but we have seen an increase in Eastern European workers in the last number of years. And again, from that survey of farmers back in 2019, we saw that 23% of them were expecting to recruit staff over the next 12 months, and over 90% of them weren't expecting to recruit an overseas worker. So this was farmers were being reliant, I suppose, more so on the local people to work on their farms. But what we have seen is that in 2018 there was 50 permits made available for non-European workers. In 2019 that increased to 100, and in 2020 the IFA were lobbying for an increase of 200 overseas non-European workers. So I suppose we're seeing, as I said, a scenario where we have an increased demand for people. There's less people available to work, and we're not relying on migrant workers, which I think is a really positive thing. But I suppose we need to make sure that before we hire anyone, we're maximizing our efficiency and exhaust all other possibilities first before taking on the leap to hiring full-time staff if needed. So, using contractors where possible, ensuring that you have the right system of production, you're maximizing grassland management, and you've got a herd of cows that are able to, work in that system. Using automation where possible, the idea of using share workers, contract rearing, strategic use of farm relief workers, having the correct scale, and then using a cost benefit analysis. So often we've seen a lot of farmers have increased in herd size and needing an extra worker or needing extra people to work on the farm, and not getting a benefit from that. So doing the analysis in your homework work first before hiring. So then in terms of employing staff, in order to attract and retain the best people, farmers need to be excellent people managers and have excellent, HR and human resource management skills. And so farmers are, we know that they're good animal managers and good, looking after their stock. So that's a skill that they learned, and equally learning about employing staff and people management skills is a learnable skill. So in terms then of the demographics of Irish farm employers, so we would have done the survey, as I said, back in 2019, and overall, we've seen of the 315 farmers who responded to the survey, they had an average herd size of 126 cows. 65% of them were classifying themselves as an employer, averaging age of 52 years. Majority again were male, and they were all the farm owners. And I suppose interestingly, 54% of the respondents had an experience as an employee, either on someone else's farm or outside the industry, in a different setting. So then, in terms of breaking the data down in terms of those who had no employees, so there's 110 respondents, 1 employee, 2 employees, or 3 or more employees. And we can see here that there was a slight numerical difference in terms of the age, so tendency for farmers with more employees to be younger. The hours worked per week, that was just a farmers estimate themselves what they were working in the week, and again, not significantly different, but there was numerical differences. And as expected, as the number of employees increased, so did the number of cows on that farm. And again, the stocking rate on the milking platform didn't vary between farm size. So from that survey, we've seen that farmers with more employees have more time off. So again, no employee up to 3 or more employees. And we're seeing that they're taking more weekends off. So on average, the farmers with 3 or more employees are taking about 12 weekends off in the year, and about 15 days holidays. So in and around farmers with 3 or more employees are taking about 40 days off in the year, which was significantly more than those with no employees or 1 employee. So then, in terms of, I suppose you've made the decision to hire someone. How are farmers recruiting? And we've seen for those you have 1 employee, 2 employee, and 3 employees, that a variety of methods were used. Farmers with 3 or more employees were using word of mouth more than those with 1 employee. The local newspaper, local adverts were utilised. Again, farmers with more employees were using online methods more. Family members was a very common method of recruitment, and as well as using employees' recommendations, which was seen in terms of farmers with 3 or more employees. So a variety of methods used. We've seen those with more employees are using probably a broader range of recruitment methods in order to attract, but word of mouth and family members and using farm relief services are kind of the 3 most commonly used ones. So then, in terms of, you've hired the staff, I suppose there is a bit of work to do in terms of the employment law. You have to adhere to the employment law, and these are kind of, I'm not going to go into detail in terms of the specific requirements. There's other courses and there's other ways of finding out that information, but in summary, these are kind of the 5 main things in terms of what you need to be doing. So providing written terms and conditions, evidence of pay slips, annual leave records, timesheets, and ensuring that workers aren't working more than 48 hours on a rolling 6 months average, and ensuring they're getting the minimum wage. And this is all about, I suppose, respecting and providing fair treatment for employees, and providing fair pay, working hours, and holidays. And this is a quote from that survey by one of the farmers. They said that if farmers want labour, they need to pay a wage appropriate to the level of skills needed, and pay a wage that's competitive with other sectors. And I suppose that kind of sums it up really, in terms of just looking after your employees and setting off the employment relationship onto the right footing. So then we asked farmers, how easy did they find it to recruit suitable employees? And just under 20% of them found it easy to recruit employees, so almost 70% found it difficult. And then we asked, how difficult was it to retain employees? And again, 36% of them found it difficult to retain employees. And then what was the source of, poor communication as a major cause of conflict on my farm was, a big issue on 50% of the farm. So I suppose, farmers were finding it difficult to recruit employees, challenging to retain them, and then identify that poor communication was a challenge on the farm. So I suppose those are kind of three key things that farmers have identified as areas to improve on. So, recruiting suitable employees is all about, using the different recruitment methods, being clear on why you're recruiting, what job you want them to do. In terms of retaining employees, we'll go through that in a few minutes, but in terms of setting up the farm and looking after the employees is important. And then communication again, we'll go through next. So in terms then of the legal workplace practices, what's happening on the farms with, 1 employee is the red bar, 2 employees is the yellow, and 3 or more is the blue bar. So we're seeing that on average that 12% of farmers who are employing staff were issuing contracts, 19% were issuing pay slips, and 14% were issuing contracts, but really that should be written terms and conditions. So and we're seeing that farmers with 3 or more employees are more compliant with legal workplace practices. So there is room for improvement, and I suppose farmers that don't follow the employment law are open for, I suppose, issues in terms of compliance with the labour law and inspections and issues that way. So Suzanne Groom would have done a study with looking at employees and employers and looking at the challenges of managing employees. And she would have done some interviews with farmers. And these are some, I suppose, the quotes that came from that study saying, I know what I want done myself, but I automatically think my employees know what I'm thinking as well. That's my biggest downfall. And another farmer said, they're difficult to manage, but you need them as well. So sometimes, because we don't plan ourselves, employees don't know exactly the routine. I have a whiteboard that I don't use. I have all these gadgets that would help, but I don't use them. That's the real problem. So I suppose those are a lot of the challenges in terms of managing employees. And there's an acknowledgement that, you can't do without them, but their farmers are struggling, or some farmers are struggling with managing them. And I suppose for me, a lot of these things, and we've seen from the previous slide, that communication is a big issue out on farm. So again, from the survey of 315 farmers, what one farmer said was, he treats any employee he respects and always talks him or her through tasks, and any task they complete successfully are complimenting them with feedback. So again, they're open the lines of communication. It's an example of good communication. They're teaching them how to do tasks at the start, and then they're giving them recognition and rewarding them for a job well done as well. Another way of helping in terms of good communication is the use of standard operating procedures. And a previous study has found that, standard operating procedures are correlated with farm size. So the larger the farm, the more likely that standard operating procedure is in place, which I suppose makes sense because larger the farm, the more likely is that there's going to be more employees there. But as we've seen from earlier on, that any farm basically has people coming into work on it. So, really standard operating procedures should be available on all farms, even if it's just for the milking task. And farmers cited a lack of time as one of the main reasons for not developing standard operating procedures. And I suppose we found in that survey of ours that 29% had standard operating procedures, and milking was the most common one. And I suppose there is templates available. So on the Teagasc website, Martina Gormley and Padraig O'Connor have put together the top 10 dairy standard operating procedures that are available for farmers to download and tailor for their own farm. So there is help out there, and I suppose that will hopefully stop the lack of time being as a reason for not developing the standard operating procedures. And standard operating procedures are designed to help improve communication. They're not designed to take away communication or to not designed to, I suppose, be used standalone. It's a communication aid, I suppose, in terms as well as talking people through the tasks and how they manage them. In terms then of factors affecting retention, so from a number of studies, inadequate working facilities. So I suppose what the challenge is there is to provide good working facilities, and we'll talk through that in the next few slides. Farmers providing or not providing, I suppose, career development and promotion opportunities. And again, it's not possible for every farmer to provide promotion opportunities, but there is the opportunities to provide, I suppose, skill development and training. Even if you hire someone, train them up and develop their skills to a certain level, and they have to go to another farm to go to a higher level, you're building up your reputation as someone who develops people, so you'll automatically find it easier to I suppose, to attract more people into a position on your farm. And again, just valuing people's opinion and trust has also been shown to improve retention. And I suppose one of the big things is in terms of responsibility and recognition. And by providing this, you're getting more buy-in and loyalty. So by responsibility and recognition, what I mean is that employees basically are looking for three things in a job. Mastery, so to improve their skills. Autonomy, so supposed to be given responsibility and recognition, and that could be just a simple, thank you or well done. And then purpose, so having a reason for doing the job. So again, that comes down to responsibility. And the way to supposed to give in terms of recognition would be, and responsibility, having a good use of time, so ensuring that you have a work-life balance. And some farmers provide assets such as giving a calf or some stock in terms of providing a recognition. But again, for a lot of staff members, it can be just as simple as acknowledgement of a thank you for a job well done, or saying well done can be enough. So in terms then of the facilities, it was found that, in Suzanne Groom's work with employers and employees, that most farmers had developed their staff facilities, but less so in stock facilities. And we would have seen this in our research as well, that it's often actually the stock facilities that employees are struggling with more. And for example, this is an employer who said that the parlour is coming under a lot of pressure now with the numbers of livestock going through it. We have about 50 more cows than we have cubicles for 2. Animal housing is great, and we'll be under a lot of pressure at calving time. So again, the farmer is recognising that these facilities are an issue, and then I suppose from the employee side, not necessarily this employer, employer's employee, but another employee said that his experience of he was living life on the edge up there. And there was no organisation. I can't work with that. I've told him I will stay with him for the busy spring, but after that I'm gone. And again, that was purely down to inadequate farm facilities. And again, a lot of times staff and employees can put up with inadequate facilities for a short period of time once they know that it's going to change. So they can put up with this scenario of, the parlour being under pressure and maybe, animal housing being under pressure because they understand where they've come from in terms of maybe expansion or whatever happened, or extra piece of land came on board and things got pushed out. But I suppose it's to know and have a deadline, and it's time action that, in a year's time we'll be doing the parlour, and then making sure that in a year's time that you live up to your word and the parlour is started, or to make sure that it's not just the employee that's doing all the milking, so that it's, there's a fair workload spread, or to be able to, I suppose, employees want to be able to see that the farmer is making adjustments for the inadequate facilities. And then in terms of the survey of 315 farmers, what we found is that, farmers' perceptions of their own facilities, in that, on average, roughly speaking, about 70% of them found that they had adequate facilities for housing for calves, feeds, roadways, etc. But yet there's still a third of farmers who acknowledge that there's probably investment required for the majority of those. And I suppose the two, so there is a lot of work, I suppose, that still needs to be done on farms in terms of facilities. So then just to summarise, that to attract new people into the industry, we require excellent farmers with good management skills. And we're seeing out on farms at the moment that from the survey that it's predominantly informal practices or HR practices that are in place, with a tendency, or with more farmers with more employees are having more formal practices in place. And I suppose there is some work required, particularly in terms of the legal side of things, to ensure that farmers are compliant. And I suppose then to summarise, to being a good employer, it's about providing regular hours, good communication, and training to improve skills, following the employment basics, so a fair wage for a fair day's work, good facilities, and providing responsibility and recognition. So that's it, Pat. Those are the slides. I don't know if there's any questions or...
No, thanks very much, Marion. There's a lot of good stuff on that there. Just to everyone that's online, if there's any questions for Marion, just drop them into the chat box there at the bottom, and we'll try our best to answer them. I suppose, Marion, a lot of it there, I suppose common sense sometimes isn't that common, but there's a number of questions. I suppose I do a lot of business plans for people expanding, and I suppose the easy part of the labour element is just to budget for it. Is it a thing with larger herds? Is it a chicken and egg thing that I just see that the larger herds seem to have better retention and getting staff back in? Is that because they're able to schedule more time off, or there's more of a team effort, do you think, or is it it's just that they have more experience employing people?
It's probably a combination effort, Pat, that yes, it's definitely easier to schedule more time off when there's more people available, because it's easier to manage the rotas. But yet, we know that there are smaller farmers who are managing to achieve that. I think it's about good organisation and good planning skills. So perhaps it's because the farmers with larger herd sizes are able to take themselves out of more of the day-to-day jobs, so that they can have that time in terms of planning, staff time off, rotas, etc., and that they're able to organise it a little bit better. And
communication seems to be a big problem right throughout the whole presentation there. So why do you think there's such a stumbling block for farmers to not explain themselves? Or I know probably from my own experience on my own farm is it's really they treat the employee like a son, and you only need to know basis, and just do the jobs and get on with it, but why is there such a mental block to that, or what do you think is causing that problem?
I think there's kind of a number of factors. So a lot of the time, particularly for farmers starting off employing someone, they're not used to it. So they're not used to having to explain what needs to be done to somebody else. So as I said, the farmer said it there in one of the slides, that he expects the employee to see what's in his head almost. He's not used to having to verbalize what they need doing to other people. Partly that's probably coming because maybe they've never had experience being an employee themselves, so they're not used to it. But a lot of it is just a habit, and again, it's because probably they've been farming, on their farm since they were, if they're growing up on the farm since they've been 3 or 4 years of age. So even by the time they're 24, they've got 20 years experience of farming on their farm, knowing exactly how everything is run. Whereas contrast that with someone just coming in who has, they still might have 4 or 5 years experience of farming, but don't have the experience on their farm. So they're not used to the way of doing it. So it's a shock to the farmer then having to explain what's inherent and, automatic for him to somebody else. And I think that's a lot of the thing, is that, a lot of the practices farmers do are so ingrained, they're just taken for granted that they're not used to having to explain that to somebody else.
And would you think with some farmers that some of the issue is that the employee might do it a different way, but still get the job done? but it's just not the way it was done on that farm, and they're not open to that little bit of change or new methods. I know from my own experience, like that, in my own place, that we leave jobs done. They're done, but not maybe the way I would do them. But still, and you just have to accept that there's other ways. The farmer's not always right, I suppose. Sometimes there's a better way of doing things, and is that maybe an issue for some people, just like it done a certain way and don't accept the change? There's other ways of doing it.
Yeah, that can be it. I suppose the key thing there is to make sure that the farmer's communicating, I suppose, what the outcome should be. So once you have the correct outcome and explain, that I want all the cows milked by whatever, for say 8 o'clock in the morning, well then it doesn't really matter how the employee does it once the cows are milked. I suppose that's a poor example in terms of milking, but yeah. It's ensuring that the farmer is, clear in terms of the outcome and what are the key or what are the non-negotiable things that need to be done. So, there's no point in saying go and milk the cows, but what you really want to ensure is go and milk the cows to ensure that they're all milked out well, sprayed, that there's certain processes, there's certain checkpoints that they have to be done. But it can be an issue in terms of different ways of doing things, and I suppose recognizing that your way is not always the best way, but equally there can be in terms of sometimes the employee realizing that their way mightn't be the best way. So that's again comes down to the communication thing of looking at both ways and seeing which works better and which works worse.
Do you think, I suppose within some farms too, that maybe a schedule of work for the upcoming week, or a sort of a plan of action, if you like, helpful? Would you find some farmers just sort of, you rock in the morning, you're given a job and you're told that job until lunchtime, and at lunchtime you're told what you're doing in the afternoon, that if employees knew what was upcoming and maybe were able to fit the jobs around what they wanted, or what way maybe they wanted to get away someday, and if they knew what was coming up, they were able to work around it? Do you think that will help the situation?
Yeah. That would be a huge help, because again, that's tying into giving the employee responsibility and giving them autonomy. So you're telling them, even if it's in the morning, giving them a list of jobs and saying these are the jobs that need to be done today, but you're giving the autonomy to the employee and the responsibility for them to do it themselves. So again, that's what employees crave, is autonomy and responsibility. So by doing that, it makes a huge difference. And I suppose it also means as well, by even if you have the list of jobs, on Monday morning, given, these are the list of jobs that we need to do for the week, it means then if the farmer has to go away or is left caught out doing other things, the employee, once he's finished a job, isn't left hanging around wondering, geez, what must I do next? It just provides good communication, and it just makes things a bit easier, that the employee isn't left hanging around wondering what needs to be done.
Yeah, just in your start of your presentation, you made the point about the scarcity of skills around in the economy, and the decrease in people working in agriculture. In face of that, what are the advantages an Irish dairy farmer can offer to set themselves aside from everyone else? Like, so have we one main selling point, or two selling points that farmers can go to, that employees really seek? If you know what I mean, that we need to be something different. We can't just compete with big industry, if you know what I mean. Like,
no, but I think for me the whole COVID thing has highlighted, how valuable living in the countryside or working in the countryside is. Being outdoors, working with animals is actually a huge attraction, a huge selling point for a lot of people. And we would have done.
You're the first person to get a positive out of COVID there.
Yeah, I know. So look, there's always positive in adversity.
Yeah.
But like, we would have done a survey with like secondary school students, asking them, what would attract them to the industry, and it was that outdoor working, healthy lifestyle, and working with animals. So those are all, really positive points. The other one is, again, you're providing a workplace that can be really healthy, and also as well, from time use studies, we know that there's huge flexibility within the working day in farming. So in our studies we've seen about farmers taking about between 2 and 3 hours, or up to 4 hours in some cases, of non-work time in the day. So compare that, we'll say, with a nursing job where you're doing 12-hour shifts, and you may only get, we'll say, 15-minute break, maybe 45-minute break or an hour and a half break if you're doing really well. Compare that with, 3 or 4 hours potentially off during the day in farming. There's a huge difference. So that's a real selling point, I think.
And I know, again, probably personal experience, but my father would have always been a believer that, to have a consistency of a person, so one person in the yard and knowing the place. But is it I think for some people now that need to open up, that maybe they outsource different jobs to different, so you might have a car frayer that maybe is only doing an hour or two, and that's their job, and they don't do anything else, particularly on the farm, and maybe someone else comes in and does another job, and maybe you fill the maybe 5 people fill the one job, if you know what I mean, and that gives you a huge flexibility for people.
Absolutely. I think we have to start looking at things differently. It's very difficult to get, as you said, the full-time person who's going to consistently come in, day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. Whereas it's much easier to get people for short periods of time. And there's a number of farmers who are doing that really successfully, and, might even have 2 or 3 different calf rearers to do the calf rearing. Someone else, 3 or 4 people doing milking. Some number of people doing even grass measuring. So it's to look at each body of work and see, can that be contracted out. And I suppose we're kind of used to that already in some regards, Pat, in terms of, if we look at milking, farmers are used to getting someone in just to do the milking. So it's about looking at breaking down the other tasks like we do with milking, and seeing, can we get people to come in and do those.
Yeah. So look, thanks very much for the presentation there, Marion. We might just call it to a halt there now. I think there's a lot of good stuff throughout it. A lot of it is common sense. What stick out to me there is obviously the communication thing. I think for some people too, maybe it's just a comment that the employee lands on the farm too late, and there's no time for so the cows are calving and they're so straight into it. And maybe if people bring them in maybe a month or 2 beforehand, build them up over time, and get used to working with each other as well. And it's less likely then when you're a bit friendlier that you'll have a row when the first cow calves, So I think there's good stuff. And I suppose for a lot of people who are looking at taking on employees for the first time, they probably should look into it and maybe there's a lot of legal requirements there that we may not be aware of or used to, and potentially a level of training, I think, Marion, would be maybe ensure success, and we're probably, as a whole, we're not maybe the best for going off and doing that, but I think it's a huge area going forward. And I agree with Marion that there's huge scope within dairy farming to offer something different, and we just have to sell ourselves a little bit different, and we'll have a successful career going forward. So again, thank you very much, Marion, and thanks for everyone logging on, and we'll see you for the next research webinar when it comes out. Thank you very much.